Hey friends, the Methodist world is a big world, and ever since I started Plain Spoken, I've talked to all kinds of people, and one of the people that I really wanted to talk to all the way along is the Reverend Christopher Ritter, who's now Global Methodist clergy like I am. He and I both left the United Methodist Church for reasons that I've been talking about online for a while, and then Chris probably has a lot of similar language, but he probably has his own language too, and I don't think we're going to talk a whole lot about that in this conversation, but I reached out to him because I wanted to talk about last week's documents that were released by the GMC pertaining to the episcopacy. Reverend Ritter served on the episcopacy task force of the GMC, and so he's been familiar with a lot of these conversations going on for a long time. He's also been publishing a series on the development of the episcopacy in Methodism, and I've found that to be a very worthy way to spend my time. So I knew that I would be wise to seek his wisdom, and then of course I always want to do this as publicly as possible so that other people can learn as well. So that's kind of my intent and thought in facilitating this conversation. The other half is just admiring him for his ministry, and you'll see what that's about. But I want to give him a proper introduction before I bring him on screen. He blogs at peopleneedjesus.net. He's the pastor at First Methodist Church in Geneseo. You can correct me if I said that wrong in a minute. That's in Illinois. It's a congregation that's been recognized for its high number of professions of faith. In addition to authoring, quote, 7 things John Wesley expected us to do for kids. That's a very worthy topic, by the way. That's published by Abingdon Press in 2016, if you want to find it. I'm going to put a link to it on the show notes. Chris has published several chapters and published articles on topics pertinent to Methodism, evangelism, effective local church ministry. He was a delegate to the 2016 and 2019 General Conferences of the UMC and was involved in helping develop 2 plans that were put forward by the Commission on a Way Forward. He's an ordained elder in the Global Methodist Church now. He holds a doctorate in evangelism from Perkins School of Theology at SMU, and he also has a Master of Divinity from Candler School of Theology, which is at Emory. He's been fortunate to travel and witness the vibrancy of the church outside of the U.S., and he has a wife of 36 years, Becky, and 4 adult children. So this is a well-weathered man by the church and by life, and it's my joy to spend time with him. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you, brother?
I'm doing well, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah. A lot of people might assume that you and I have talked a lot before. This is actually our very first time to talk on screen. We've never met in person, but I want to thank you on the front end. You've promoted a lot of my content over the last more than a year now, and thank you for doing that and making me look like a not crazy person.
Honored to do that. It's been great to watch your rise and just the success of your efforts there. It's been a great help.
Well, I'd like to think that. Well, I know for a fact a lot of it's been because of you, so thank you. And for people who don't understand the role that you've played, I mean, it's not just with me. There have been a number on peopleneedjesus.net. This is a blog website that you have. You write your own content, but also you have 2 different feeds that people regularly pay attention to. There's the Fallout, the UM Fallout page, anything pertaining to the United Methodist Church, drama, any articles published by worldly stuff, but also a lot of insider baseball stuff. You just have it's a compendium, really. And then you began several months ago one for just the Global Methodist Church. So you've been cataloging this. How long have you been doing the compendiums?
I believe it started in 2017 when the Way Forward stuff started. There was just a lot being published, and there was no one place to get it all. And so I just decided to not just to collect the stuff that I agree with, but all of it, and just try to include an objective description that the person who wrote it wouldn't disagree with. And so I'm guessing we've got to be going close to 10,000 entries by now. There's been a lot of ink spilled over the separation of the United Methodist Church, and that's the best catalog I know. I'd like to save these things because you always want to refer back. So I said, well, let's just make it public, and then anybody can look at it and just be a resource for the whole church.
Yeah, that's undergirded by an ideology I care very much about. Is just transparency and Papertrail. There's nothing worse than he said, she said, and all kinds of suspicions. It's great just to get everything in writing, get everybody looking at the same thing, And it's a very common sense thing to do, and yet you're quite an exceptional person for doing it. I'm not aware of many other people. It's just something that's so labor intensive. I mean, how much time are you spending on this? And I should also plug Team Caffeine, but I'll do that in a minute. I want to know how much time it takes to stay on top of your compendium.
Gosh, it is varied, and we're getting ready to come into the general conference season for both the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church. And as far as reads a day, it on a low news day, it's maybe in the very low thousands, and then that just triples and quadruples. But as far as time commitment, I just go through it and just copy and paste, and it doesn't take really that much time. I follow the news anyway, so I just take a little extra time to create a link and copy a description in, and I've got it down to pretty much just a habit now, and I can just check in the middle of a busy day. Sometimes I travel and there's lags. I try to warn people when there's going to be a lag, but it's not been overwhelming. I said, well, I'll stay through at least to the General Conference of the United Methodist Church, but we'll see how things develop. I think there's still going to be news. It's going to take several years for this to really settle into a new reality. I see two Methodisms forming. I think it's a fascinating story. Somebody's going to have to write this story one day into a book. I don't know that it's going to be me, but this creates pretty much a record of everything that's been said and done during this process.
I mean, if not you, then who? So a big part of what I wonder, I only check out your compendium like once a week, and it overwhelms me. Then you're looking at it pretty much every day, and then what percentage of the stuff that you post do you really read or watch all the way through? It couldn't be that much.
My job is to create a record that the
Right.
thing exists, not to, so enough to get a description of it. I do not watch every video. It's helpful when folks create a summary or write in a way that you can just kind of get the gist of what they're trying to say. But I do not pour over that would be very time consuming to really
Wouldn't it?
pour over and analyze every one. So thankfully I don't do a book report on all this stuff. I just kind of have to say enough about it so people know what it is and whether they want to click on it or not.
Well, it kind of is a book report when you're talking about writing up the whole story. And, if not you, then I've had somebody talk to me and say, hey, you got to do it. And man, names, dates, the sequence of events, all of that is just so taxing for me. I would have to just go back and reread all of your compendium, which I think there are some nerds out there who'd really enjoy doing that. But man, I can't fathom it.
Yeah, I am a nerd. I'm not sure I'm that much of a nerd though. We'll have to, let's see what happens here.
Well, so you're familiar with, so you're also kind of like a jack of all trades. You don't major in any one minor. Your breadth of knowledge is historical, theological, practical, and then you're also plugged into a lot of the personalities that have made Methodism what it is today. So I'm kind of curious, who else knows as much as you do? There are a lot of people who, just run their mouth like I do, but who are the other minds that you think have just been really helpful in developing this movement contemporaneous with you?
Well, I don't claim to be the expert on anything. I'm just an observer, and just in the Global Methodist Church, we have so many smart people that just have been strategically placed by God to think through these things. And you've had Keith Boyette on, I know, on this, and I tell you what, talk about a man for all seasons. He's really got to serve under his leadership, going back to WCA, and then I don't know there's another person on earth that could have done what he did in the spirit in which he did it, to the quality that he did it. I'm just always amazed by Tom Lambrecht, who, he's when he says something, I pay attention. It's just as a guy that really has a depth of knowledge, very unassuming, very quiet, doesn't draw attention to himself. Walter Fenton does a great job. I'm amazed by, back in boy, these dates get away from me too, but, I think 2018 we were into the Next Steps Working Group in WCA. This looks like it's going to be a new denomination. And back then, Walter, they said, well, how many churches would leave, if there was an option to leave? And back then, Walter kind of just, 22, 20, 25%, but probably 22%. I mean, to guess that back then, and what some people don't realize is for the United Methodist General Conference, every year the progressive team has come, this is our year, and the traditionalists have said, actually, that vote's going to be, they've done their math, they've done the depth of research. I'm just amazed that people can do that, to really take that diverse of a group of people and say, this is where people are falling. They've done the homework to really talk to people and to understand where they sit, to do that kind of projection. I'm always amazed by that. There's a lot of great theological minds that I really appreciate. I love I read what David Watson churns out, and I love that he shares. He's kind of unusual as an academic to get into the nitty gritty of what's going on in the church. He's not an ivory tower guy, but he's certainly certainly has the academic credentials to that can go toe to toe with any of the other folks. So there's just there's very quiet people that you just want to lean in and listen to. Jessica LeGrone is one of those. She doesn't say much at a meeting, but you better lean in and listen when she's talking, because she's going to say something worth hearing. There's just so many. I hate to start naming names because I'm leaving some great people out.
It's kind of a mean question to ask you, but it is one of the things that I realize is, there are too many people in Methodism. Not everybody knows each other real well. Some know each other better than others. Some work well together, and I don't even know about them working together until I ask questions. And it's just whenever we are weighing the different voices speaking, okay, where is this person coming from? What are they about? And so, with you, despite all the work that you've put in, there's still people that probably maybe don't know who you are and what you're about. And
sure.
Who it is that you really appreciate and align with. And I'm not aware of, you don't have a beef with anybody. You and the guy that I interviewed, Donnie, what was his name? We talked about the episcopacy a little bit, but y'all had a back and forth.
Donnan. You may be talking
There
about
it is, Donnan. Thank you. Yeah, you guys had a very polite disagreement about alternative financing options, which I really appreciated. I love the give and take whenever it's done in a genteel and respectful way. But for the most part, everybody gets along really well, but we find ourselves at a place right now where there are conflicting visions about what Methodism has been, is now, should be. And I just think it's really important to know, to do my best to have a known quantity of each person. And from what I can tell, your passion, well, what I want to hear you talk about is your theological passion, but from what I can tell, it's a practical theological passion where you just want to do not only what's faithful, but what works. And it's often, the reason I say that is because you crafted the jurisdictional conference plan, which was one of the 3 plans put forward at the 2019 General Conference. I think you said whenever you put that forward, it's not my preferred option, but I think we need to have that as an option for the church to have a robust conversation. And I just thought that showed a lot of integrity, that it doesn't have to be all your way. You're not some bullheaded guy. You just want to have a conversation in earnest and then have a healthy dynamic going forward. And so I kind of wanted to see how that characterization struck you, but then also hear you talk about what it is that you do feel really strongly about Methodism going forward.
Well, I guess I would first say that any interest in denominational politics or polity is kind of a relatively recent thing for me. That happened in 2014 at an annual conference. There was some news story, I'm not sure what it was, about the church maybe going to break up, or, there's been that for years. And I was sitting in an annual conference. We had a particularly boring speaker up giving a particularly long talk. And I was saying, how are we going to fix this? I love the church. I'm all in. I grew up in a gravel road Methodist church, got saved at a Methodist camp, called to ministry at that same camp several years later. I was pastoring 3 churches when I was 18 years old. And except for a 2-year hiatus when I was in my early 20s, I've been pastoring ever since. Went to United Methodist schools, benefited from that, didn't agree with everything that was put forward. But, I just assumed when I die, they'd put one of those little circuit rider emblems on my tomb, and that would be the end of me. I just really felt like my calling was to the local church, just kind of whistle past the graveyard of all the dysfunctional stuff and just focus on making disciples of Jesus Christ. And I think in 2014, I had the revelation that this is going to come back and it's going to profoundly impact the local church. We can't just pretend like it's not there anymore. We're going to have to come to some sort of a settlement, and agreeing to disagree isn't going to do it, because there's some aggressive ideologies involved in this that are just not going to quit, not going to stop. We're going to need a firewall of some kind. Didn't want to see the church separated. I've been, I try to be a voice for unity all along. So I figured out, how would we do this? And I think, well, we got this extra layer called jurisdictions. They don't really do what they were originally intended to do, which had more to do with racial and geographic segregation. Let's do a jurisdictional solution for the present day. And I just put forth ideas out there, and people would say, well, that won't work because X, Y, Z. And I said, well, let's fix that. Let's just work on it, kind of public forum and multiple iterations of that. And I didn't write a word of the connectional conference plan.
That's what it was. Know. Okay, connectional conference plan.
It was the Commission on a Way Forward took my basic concept. I know they referred to it. I got some calls along the way. What about this? What about that? But they did a highly refined version of it that I really admired. It got no traction, whatsoever. And all the while, by 2016, I was all in on the WCA effort. It seemed like I was elected to General Conference and saw the dysfunction there. It just left shaking my head. So, I got on board with WCA from the very, very beginning, the pre-meetings, and, there's a Chicago statement that launched it in 2016, and I got to present that to the crowd gathered there. And started to think about other kinds of ways to go about this. And the traditional plan, if you remember, it was left, this is going way back, but it was left in outline form. The bishops took a preliminary report from the Commission on a Way Forward, and they said, okay, we'd like to see a full version of the one church plan, and we'd like to see a full version of the connectional conference plan. We don't really want to see a full version of the traditional plan. There was a key meeting of the bishops that were the African bishops. I wasn't in the room, obviously, but by reports, the African bishops stood up and said, you haven't given us anything we can support. You haven't given us anything our people can vote for. We better have the full traditional plan too. And as I remember it, it was Bishop Scott Jones who called. I think it was me and Tom Lambrecht and John Lamperis that kind of over a weekend wrote that thing. John was really good on the accountability stuff, and my part of that was mainly 2801, which put forward that an annual conference could leave the denomination. And that was upheld by the Judicial Council. That was kind of a big moment for me as a nerd. That is if General Conference creates a pathway, that is possible. A lot of people said it wasn't, and that later became the basis for the the separation protocol, which was never approved. So just that's been kind of my role, just kind of behind the scenes, thinking through things, writing things up. I started my blog, called it People Need Jesus, because I wanted to write about Jesus. That's not about Methodists fussing with one another. And one day, hopefully, get back to Jesus. This is important to the church, which is important to Jesus, so it's all connected. But I started my blog just to write about Jesus and ministry stuff, and somehow I got sucked into the vortex of Methodist separation, and that's really been, I think, what people go there for mostly now these days. So hopefully we can beat our swords into plowshares, again, and redirect energy toward the mission field.
Yeah, maybe. I hear a lot of people yearning for that, but I think, at least the way I've made sense out of the present moment, is we're fighting so bad right now because we didn't fight well all the way along. I think Drew McIntyre says we're so bad at talking about religion and politics because for so long we didn't allow people to talk about religion and politics, and so now we're bad at it and we're angry while we do it, and that's a bad combination. So I'm more in favor of just a prolonged engagement with the spiritual warfare that Christ requires in the church, and sometimes that means building up, but sometimes it also means tearing down. And I'm personally very grateful to, I don't know if the word happy warrior would describe you well, but that's kind of how I've interpreted you, Rob Renfro, Tom Lambrecht, Keith Boyette. We've needed capable people at the helm who are not so averse to conflict that they just can't function in the midst of the current environment. We've needed strong people to stand up and lead the way. So I've already learned something new today. I had no idea that you were one of the authors of the traditional plan. While we're going back to that history, I want to know, because I remember watching the live stream of the 2019 General Conference, and the whole thing starting off with them saying, sorry, we don't even have a draft of the traditional plan to present to you. And then I remember somebody came forward with a thumb drive saying, I have it right here, and they handed it off. And that final version wasn't even able to be entertained. It was adopted kind of piecemeal in a way that a lot of it was shut down afterwards. It just seemed to me, watching from 1,000 miles away, like the whole thing was set up to fail to begin with. How much of that did I wrongly perceive? And then, do you remember that exact moment I'm talking about where I don't even remember who it was that brought the thumb drive up with the legislation on it? Do you remember that at all?
I do. I think I know what you're referring to. The traditional plan existed well before General Conference. It was in the Way Forward report. It was vetted by the Judicial Council along with the other plans. It came from the Way Forward. It didn't come from me. It didn't come from Bishop Jones. It came from the Way Forward, through them. But they just hadn't spent time to develop it into full legislative language. But that full language was there. There was a moment where somebody, there were a lot of amendments that needed to come, because we had that, as I remember it, we had Judicial Council saying these things need to be fixed in all the plans. And so we had to do certain amendments, and we were clumsily trying to do that. I think if we had to do all that over again, we would have offered one substitute with all the fixes in it. I think that was a strategic mistake, maybe on those of us that were, hindsight's 2020. So you think, okay, we need to make these 6 changes. We should have just done one big change. But still we wouldn't have done it because, they routed the peace part of the traditional plan. The traditional plan was, we're going to uphold our current teachings, and we're going to create a wide exit for anybody that wants out. Take your annual conference, take your church. We don't want your money. You just, no harm, no foul. That gets lost in the shuffle, that it was actually a very gracious exit plan. That was.
And are you talking about 2553 right now?
I'm talking about 2801. It never got approved because it was sent to the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters. They said, well, it affects the world, so they've got to approve it, and they killed it in committee. So the traditional plan wasn't just a bunch of nastiness about we're going to have all these trials. It was a gracious exit plan. Take annual conference property. It was very much a peace plan.
That's something that I think is worth me just putting in my own words, because I'm not sure a lot of people know that piece of the history. The way that centrists and liberals have characterized it now is, hey, we're just using the plan that the traditionalists created. They're the ones that came up with this punitive 2553 plan. Usually my argument has been, even when 2553 was created, we had no idea that the way that the unfunded pension liabilities would be calculated would be so punitive. But that's neither here nor there, because you, one of the original authors of the plan, in the comprehensive work that was originally submitted, had a not at all punitive, a very easy way out that you offered those who were on the other side. And that's lost. No, I don't know how many people even know that
I
your
don't
hearts
think
were of
not
peace.
nearly enough people do. 2553 was not a traditional plan, piece of the traditional plan at all. Basically, they produced the three plans, and then there was some piecemeal, like pension stuff. There were little individual pieces that were left over, and one, it was put forward by a lawyer in Texas. I can't remember her name, Leah something or other. She was a member of the Commission on the Way Forward. She's the one that actually submitted. Somebody's got to submit the legislation as an individual, and she was Leah Taylor, I think, was the one that did that. And what that was written for was saying, okay, we're going to approve some kind of plan. But you know what? There's still going to be local churches that just want to be independent, that want to be out of the whole thing, whether we do the one church plan or connectional conference plan or traditional plan. So really, 2553 was, what about churches that want to go independent? It was never intended, that the assumption was one of these plans will take care of the vast majority of churches, will be pacified through the Way Forward plan, but there may be churches that want to exit from denominationalism altogether. Like when the Presbyterians separated, they said, okay, we're going to separate, but you've got to go into a church, a denomination of similar polity with a trust clause and all that. The funny thing, what the United Methodists did, they said, you got to be independent before you can join another denomination. The only exit path required you to be independent, which is not very connectional, I don't think. We pushed everybody toward independence, and then you could join. So that's why you have 7,700 disaffiliations, and only maybe 4,800 have joined to date the Global Methodist Church. Hopefully more will join. But it wasn't designed as a main exit. It's like a major stadium where a lot of people want to leave, and we're just going to open up one little side door, that's made for the janitor to come in and out. That's kind of what we've been dealing with. And of course, the price tag is totally controlled by the annual conferences, and some of those have been very, very punitive. So, 2553 is not some sort of conservative sledgehammer that, oops, we got it turned on us now. This was just a little side piece of legislation produced by the Commission on the Way Forward that traditionalists did want to pass and did want to perfect and did help pass, because we felt like it was important to have a full exit option. But that's totally gotten lost in all the.
See, that's part of the history that needs to get written down, and I'm sure you've written it down somewhere, and I've missed it. But and I knew that there's just been so many moving parts and so many things moving now that a lot of people just need to focus on the present rather than rectifying the misimpressions of the past. And I would love to spend another 30 minutes on that, but I know we need to talk about episcopacy. Before we pivot to episcopacy, I wanted to plug Team Caffeine. We've talked about your website, your blog. I haven't talked about Team Caffeine. It's a subscription service where you send not just your digest, but also some analysis that you've done each week on developments as you've seen them. Really, I've been following Team Caffeine for, 6-7 months. Really good content, and so it's a really good bargain. If people want to go sign up for Team Caffeine, where should they go?
Well, there's a link on the compendium, that's where most people go if they like my site, is they check the compendium for the news. And there's a little red button there. It's the first way I tried to monetize my site, just to cover expenses and give a little compensation for time, was put ads in. I was not happy with the ads thing at all. There's some pretty gross stuff that you don't get to choose what ads show up in your feed, and it just wasn't Christ honoring. And didn't want to do that. So I started this as a way. I have, friends that they're always asking how they can support. So it's like $5 a month, and I'll send you a Monday message with here's what I think is important that's going on in the Global Methodist Church, United Methodist Separation, all that stuff. And some of these I make public. I might produce a link on the compendium for maybe 10% of them or something like that if I am of a mood to do that. But yeah, it's just a group of friends that we had a lot of folks that were like lay leaders in churches that trying to keep up with this. And the whole goal of Team Caffeine is to give leaders the information they need to lead well in seismic change that's been going on. Most of us have to shepherd a church through all this, and it's been a wild and woolly time. So it's just designed for church leaders to give them I'm going to read this stuff anyway, so if I can digest it for other church leaders that don't, if it can all be in one place for them, so they don't have to comb the interwebs for all the different views. If it can be in one place, that's I think a service to my fellow pastors and church leaders. So it's called Team Caffeine because they provide me with Diet Pepsi and coffee to the caffeine to do the little extra work. So that's why
I didn't know that's what the source of the title. That's funny. But yeah, I would gladly affirm that it's been of great service to me and many people. I know there are many people who stay posted to everything you update and will send me stuff. Would you do this go look at Ritters Compendium. He just did this. And a lot of them have given up on me because there's no way I can keep up. But anyway, it's been a huge resource for me. I don't know if you ever watch my live stream on Fridays, but sometimes I'll just go to your website and scroll down and say, this looks interesting, and read it with my audience.
Jeffrey, now I'm famous because you dropped my name on your, it's funny. I went to our clergy gathering for the Great Lakes, and like Jeffrey Rickman mentioned your name. I said, that's great of him to do that. I appreciate that. That's you don't know how famous you are, man. People just really appreciate your content. We haven't quite had anything quite doing what you do. I avoid, I could put all my links on social media, but I just don't have time for all the back and forth. I don't have the stomach for it, all the opinions. And so I put it on, I do it because there's no comment feature. I don't want to interact with everybody, or you shouldn't have put this on, or every once in a while I get somebody that I post their link and they want to argue about what it's just, I don't have time for that. I just don't, I'm happy to do it, but I can't do all that. So, I'm happy that you have discussion format.
Some people get angry at me,
you don't know how famous you are.
I don't get nearly as much. I know that I make my way around, and that's kind of what I hoped for. I mean, it's not about me so much. I wanted the ethos of the Global Methodist Church to be more dialogue based. I wanted conversations to be out in the open rather than behind closed doors. And in the age of independent media, I just follow a lot of independent people doing this, and of course, it's possible to do a very poor job at it, which is why I like having the document I'm looking at right on page, so I can be corrected and double checked. But if someone isn't doing this, then the way I looked at it was a lot of the dysfunction of the United Methodist Church was pretty inevitable in the Global Methodist Church. We just needed to have a different forum in which people could talk. So I hope for a future where I am a resource to Methodism more broadly, where people can just talk about the doctrinal heritage we have and the practical ways of living it out together. And then also, I do think a really important component is naming the sins of the church and separating the wolves from the sheep. And I never want to become like a vindictive nasty person, but I do think we have to have a public forum where we name what Satan's trying to do to us and renounce that. And so I'll continue to suss that out. But I love anytime I hear that that the people I like appreciate me. So it's been cool to do what I do. I want to pivot now to episcopacy because you've been a part of these conversations, well, since before they began, really. but you served on the task force for the episcopacy, and I know that you guys have a confidentiality agreement, and I'm not going to ask you any questions about back and forth within that committee, but you were trying to do something very difficult as a committee, which was to provide a working, comprehensive picture of what the episcopacy could and should be for the Global Methodist Church that would make everybody happy, which is, of course, an impossible task. So, and it's not even, I mean, you want to make people happy, but also you have to be faithful to the scriptures and to the heritage that we have. And so that means potentially alienating people. As I understand it, just the basic timeline was y'all met over a period of almost a year, I think, with a prolonged conversation about many different facets of episcopacy, how it can and should work. You finally, your chair, Jeff Greenway, finally put together a synopsis, the report of the task force on the nature of episcopacy, sent it to the TLC. TLC reviewed it for another couple of months, finally came out with their own recommendations that largely do mirror what your task force did, but also have some unique features as well. And then Part 5 has now been reworked to kind of fit the new terminology that we're going to go forward with, but also a unique understanding of what the episcopacy can and should look like for the GMC. How much of what I just said corresponds with reality, and have I misunderstood anything?
No, I think you got a handle on it. You know, this is not a new discussion. I was part of the Next Steps working group back in I guess it was 2018, that WCA put together to think, okay, if we're going to have a new denomination, which it's a real possibility, what's going to be the shape of that? And I chaired the episcopacy team for that, the sub-team for that conversation. And I remember sitting in a room with, maybe 40, 50 church leaders saying, bishops or no bishops? That was a fundamental question. You know, there are folks who are allergic to bishops.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a very positive experience throughout my ministry. I've never felt picked on by a bishop. Every appointment I've had has been a challenge, but an opportunity. And my experience has not been what everybody's experience has been. But we get down to kind of a fundamental question is, if bishops protect doctrine, as we've said they do, why didn't they in the United Methodist Church? And if it's better not to have bishops, why did British Methodism, that didn't have bishops, do worse than we did? So I think at the end of the day, my conclusion is, now we have people that say that episcopacy is essential. If you're going to be a church, you need bishops. I probably would not say that myself, but it is historic. It has been. There is a godly office there of overseer, an apostolic office. That's really what the First Methodist, the Christmas conference folks, that organize the church. They really run a new nation, and they said, we have an opportunity to restore New Testament Christianity here on new soil, and we have a growing nation. We're free now from Britain. We can just say, what's New Testament Christianity? And they saw that apostolic office. They saw the Apostle Paul traveling from church to church, correcting what needed to be corrected, doing the work of an evangelist as well, shepherding above the level of the local church. And they said that's New Testament Christianity. And the office that best fits that, Wesley preferred general superintendent, a less theologically loaded, because bishops had a lot. We think the word bishop has a lot of baggage in our day. They had a lot of baggage in Anglicanism, and a lot of bishops opposed Wesley. So, the Americans decided we're going to use it's that overseeing ministry. They ordained bishops back then, not just consecrated them, and they saw it as a New Testament office. And so it was an effort to restore that New Testament, what they call primitive Christianity, which Wesley referred to. In fact, that was Wesley's nickname, was primitive Christianity. That's what some people call me, because he harped on it so much. Mm-hmm. And so that was the original effort. And of course, it's evolved many, many times over the last couple hundred years. But the Methodist version was really unique. It was an itinerant. Most episcopacies would be situated in a certain place, a diocesan model where they're located and govern a certain geographic area. But our bishops were horseback. And they called them itinerant general superintendents, and I don't think anything like that had ever existed before, in the history of the church under the title of a bishop. And we've been more and more locating bishops in a region, regionalizing, and they're more kind of a local annual conference functionary now under United Methodism. So could we reclaim some of that original vision, or does it even fit now? Just because it worked in the end of the 1700s and that was what they thought was New Testament back then, do we have the same opinion now? So those were some of the basic questions. And probably an anti-Episcopal bias among a lot of Methodists that joined the Global Methodist Church. That we have this tension, don't we, about people that want to recreate a new version of United Methodism and people that say, let's just throw the whole thing out. There's no baby in that bathwater. Let's just start over. So that's been the discussion, in Global Methodism. Writ large is just how much to keep, how much to throw away. But even back then, we said, okay, we're going to have bishops.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've already sent it to you. I haven't started publishing on it yet, but I've written down what I understand to be 12 essential characteristics of Methodism, without which Methodism is not Methodism anymore. And one of those is a hunger and a desire for the primitive church, that we're not inventing something new, but rather we're reclaiming something eternally true. So I don't have a hard time going with episcopacy, and I have a hard time caring about whether or not it's an order of its own or it's a special called group of elders. And in case it needs to be said, one of the things that viewers should understand is the view of episcopacy that has been put forward not just by your task force, but by the TLC for approval this September, is that the bishops are not their own order. We have deacons and elders, and then bishops would be a subset of elders that are consecrated for that task. I don't care so much about that, but I do care about the polity of the church reflecting what we find in the New Testament. There are a lot of people, I would characterize them as just ambivalent about the New Testament model. They don't care. It's partly practical. We just don't need them. And it's partly selfish. I just don't want them. I don't like reporting to somebody like that. But I have a hard time validating. I understand that there are some wonderful dynamic leaders that don't want bishops, but I'm willing to say, well, they're just not Methodist. How closely do you approximate my position on that?
Well, I'm very comfortable with being in a church with bishops. I have a high regard for the office. The historic nature of the office. I think that the church needs to select leaders to shepherd over the whole flock, and that's what bishops are. We had a very different model coming out of a WCA task force, which basically, one reform we knew we wanted was we needed to, if they're general superintendents, they've got to be affirmed by the General Conference in some way. That the United Methodism strayed from that in 1939, where then they created jurisdiction. So you have general superintendents that don't have the blessing of the general church. So we need to come back and retie the episcopacy to the General Conference, consecrate them at General Conference. We struggled back in the day, the Next Steps Working Group, because we wanted more local control too. We wanted to flatten the whole thing out, make it more grassroots. So I think our solution back then, if I remember correctly, was we were going to have General Conference elect a pool of potential bishops, and then an annual conference when it wanted a bishop, when it needed a bishop, they could pull from that pool and basically call somebody from that pool to be their bishop, having already received the blessing of General Conference to be a bishop. But just in these years of the formation of the Global Methodist Church, one thing that has been a surprise was what a blessing our presidents pro tem have been. They were supposed to be a placeholder, and at one time we thought bishops would serve more closer to the annual conference level, even though they're general superintendents. And I think one of the things we just noticed is that having one of your own number lead the annual conference as the most direct leader, that's worked well for us, and it feels right and feels healthy and good. So with this latest task force, you'll notice the recommendation is we're going to call them conference superintendents. That's what the Free Methodists call them, conference superintendents. And then the bishop names the conference superintendent, but is over several conferences, and then help comprise the general superintendency as well. So it's taken different forms over the years, but you asked my opinion. I like our final product very much. I love the recommendations from the TLC. I think it seems healthy and good. We're going to need to refine our goal as we go along. There'll be another general conference in 2026, I understand. So we're not going to elect full-term bishops. A bishop can normally serve 2 terms, but they got to be reelected at the next general conference. So they have 6 years and another stand for election again. That's an accountability measure. We're going to have evidently interim bishops for the next 2 years. Until that, so these are going to be, maybe think about newly retired clergy, or people with a lot of credibility that don't want to be bishop very long. And I'm not sure, we don't have the number that are going to be, but we hope to elect some interim bishops that'll get us through to 2026. Take some of the pressures off of Bishops Jones and Webb, who've been traveling the world for us and overly stretched. And then we'd have full Episcopal elections in 2026.
Yeah, it's a very creative. Well, I don't know. I don't know what else you would do. You have to do something, so you just deal with the situation as it is, and you create a working scenario. But I don't know how many people foresaw that we would just have 2-year temporary bishops to get us by until another general conference. I still don't know how many people are aware that we have kind of a schedule, and it's hard for me to fit together in my head because in the United Methodist Church, they're already scheduling another special general conference 2 years out from now. But with the Global Methodist Church, there's also a special general conference. They're not going to cover everything this September. They're only covering some specific parts of the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, and then they'll hammer out the rest in 2 years. So it's going to be at least a 2-year formative period to kind of create our polity that we're at. And so part of that is going to be having these temporary bishops that are hopefully over 4 or 5 annual conferences, each of which conference is overseen by a connectional conference superintendent. I forget what it was called. You just said it. Yeah. And no system is perfect, and a lot of times the system is only as good as the people in it. So there's a good question about, are we going to be able to cull the correct leadership for episcopacy? There's a very practical question of the saying, as I've encountered it, is it's very easy to leave Egypt, but it's very difficult to get Egypt out of us. So when we've come, most of us, the vast majority of us, out of the United Methodist Church with its norms around episcopacy, I noted in the report of the Task Force on Episcopacy, there was a concern for, we need a period of revising our shared understanding of how episcopacy works. And we should not hop right back into recreating what we did in the UMC. And so I know that's part of the thought behind having this 2-year liminal period. But as you understand it, what are the key cultural differences that need to be, what are the things that everybody needs to understand we are augmenting about episcopacy coming out of the UMC? Everybody should understand, here's how Global Methodists see bishops differently than we saw in the United Methodist Church.
Yeah, before I get into that answer, we were talking about interim bishops. The other thing that's going on is we don't know how many African bishops we might inherit. So, we don't know the shape of the Global Methodist Church globally just yet, because there's a whole lot of United Methodists that are left in limbo still today. So that might
Right.
affect how we go forward. That's another argument for having, to not engrave these things in stone, to get us down the road, where we can, in 2026 we'll know a lot more about the shape of things and how to organize. So, one thing that I think I would like people to know is all these worries about bishops being too powerful. If you read the recommendation from the TLC, that should allay any fears of having a episcopacy that's too powerful or autocratic. We started from the very DNA of the Global Methodist Church to say every local church owns its own property. If you want to leave the Global Methodist Church, pray about it for 90 days, and then we wish you well if you want to leave. Nobody's held prisoner. That means bishops are not in a place to force an appointment that the church doesn't want, on them. It's much more of a dialogue between the cabinet and much more grassroots. I mean, our bishops now are not in the nitty gritty of appointment making like United Methodist bishops were, where they're sitting around a table. That's happening with the cabinet, and appointments are open ended now. So we're not reshuffling the deck every year. We are just basically looking for those churches that need a change or have asked for a change, and then trying to facilitate that. That's what presiding elders are taking a lot of that load as well. So it's much more grassroots, and so the episcopacy has always been tied to itineracy, and there's I think I saw an article this week, somebody in the Global Methodist Church saying, are we still itinerant or are we not still itinerant? I think that's an open question
Yeah, that's
right
Cameron
now.
Wright. I've been writing back and forth with him. We might have a public conversation about that. But yeah,
Yeah, he
that's
wrote a long
volunteered by
piece,
this.
and
Yeah.
I didn't get to read it all, but he had a lot to say about it. But I think that's an interesting discussion, because the episcopacy and itineracy have always been linked. And I think what the proposal does is kind of just acknowledge current reality, and that's an area where we're probably not going to be able to recreate the conditions that the First Methodist preachers existed in the 1700s when they formed the church. So it's a humble episcopacy. There aren't that many levers of power. There's a point of power over the conference superintendent, but obviously, they're going to want to appoint people that have a ton of credibility in the annual conference. So, that's not really, I don't see an opportunity for controversy there. They're going to name the connectional operations officer, which I think is appropriate. They're going to nominate, I noticed, the connectional operations officer, which will be elected by a connectional council. The bishops are really going to be freed to offer spiritual leadership. It mentions there that our bishops can produce teaching documents for the church,
Right. I
which,
noticed that. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's healthy. We face any number of ministry challenges, and our bishops can provide some directions. Here's how we ought to do this. The original Methodist conferencing was, what are we teaching? How are we doing ministry? What do we need to correct? It was question and answer format, and they got together and held each other accountable in love for those things. So I think we're restoring that a bit in our plan. But don't go away thinking that bishops are gonna, strut around in purple, being princes of the church. It's a very humble office with a lot of spiritual responsibility, not that much temporal power, and I think that's by design.
Let me regurgitate what I think I just heard you say. The main differences are they're going to be more itinerant, more humble, less administrative. Did I all that fits
I think
in
that's fair.
anything I
That's a fair
missed?
summary. No, that's good.
Okay. There are specific concerns that I want to anticipate from the people who listen to this. There are two primary ones that I have corruption and desire of power, comfort, and money. And of course, those are related. But when we're talking about corruption, one of the things that happened in the United Methodist Church was bishops were also tasked with safeguarding the faith that was once entrusted to the saints. They largely, completely neglected that duty, especially in recent years. And I forget which document it is, but of the 3 documents released last week, I and another person I spoke to noticed that when a complaint was made against a bishop, I think it was in the report of the Task Force on Episcopacy, the complaint was originally initially on the front end, given to the other bishops to deal with, which suggests to me a high probability of them not bringing the hammer down on each other because they're colleagues. I noted in part 5 when I read it last night that it goes to the committee on the General Committee on Episcopacy. That committee is actually going to have a ton of power. I think there's 6 ladies, 6 clergy that are responsible for overseeing all the episcopacy. And they go through a general election at General Conference, very similar to how the bishops do, 60% plus 1. My concern is, how is that a sufficient dynamic? I just want to make sure that the moment a bishop is refusing to bring the hammer down on disorderly walkers, that they are dismissed. And I don't know how likely that actually is, given what has been put forward right now. So I was just interested, given what's been put in writing by the TLC, do you imagine that there are other amendments that could be submitted at the coming convening conference that will guarantee that bishops are held accountable to that high standard of protecting the faith once and for all entrusted? Or do you think that this is just something that the laity and the clergy just as a whole have to keep an eye on and pray about, and there's really not much we can do? I don't know. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so the reference you're talking about is that when a complaint comes against a bishop, the General Committee on Episcopacy, which is a new body that we haven't had before, can refer that back to the Assembly of Bishops for resolution. That is to correct a loophole in the United Methodist polity that has prevented mutual accountability by the bishops. So there's been a lot of people saying, Council of Bishops, why don't you talk to one another about, when Bishop Sprague denies the resurrection, why don't you guys why don't we hear something from the Council of Bishops saying, no, this is not what we believe? But bishops have hidden behind, I think, in United Methodism, the fact that there's no accountability function in the Council of Bishops as it's described. It is just a fellowship of bishops. There's no accountability wing to it. The accountability happens in the jurisdictional committees on episcopacy. We have no role in that. So you had kind of the Council of Bishops kind of wiping their hands of one another's conduct instead of having those tough conversations. Now, there's been some attempts here and there, and I think there's more. They try to come out of all their meetings with a united front, but I'm sure that there's disagreement in the Council of Bishops. But we want to make it explicit that you watch over one another in love as the Assembly of Bishops. You have a mandate to correct what needs to be corrected. Now, you can't sweep it under the rug. If there's a complaint, the resolution of that complaint has to be shared with the Committee on Episcopacy. And if they don't like what you've done there or don't think it's enough, they're going to offer their own accountability to that. So
that was the part I needed to hear you say right there, because I think a lot of people, the fear we have is that the Assembly of Bishops would create kind of like an in-group mentality and kind of excuse each other's sins, as is a normal group dynamic. But you're saying there's at least one other oversight group that gets to review any actions or inactions that they take and determine if they're satisfactory.
We have the baggage of just resolutions. We came to a just resolution, which was zero accountability. Mm-hmm. There was no real resolution at all. So we don't want to do that. So that General Committee on Episcopacy is quite a I don't want to say powerful. That's probably not the right word, but it is significant responsibilities are entrusted to that group. If you're on that committee, you're not running for bishop. You can't be elected as a bishop out of that. So right now, the jurisdictional committees in the United Methodism, that's kind of a good indication of who's going. It's the most prominent committee to be on, and so it's a good indication of who's going to become future bishops if you're on the committee on episcopacy. So there's kind of this, it's bishops and almost bishops together. We don't have that dynamic in the General Committee on Episcopacy. You're not eligible while you serve, so you can't use that as a springboard into the episcopacy. Another interesting thing I notice is, annual conferences can nominate one of their own, and they can also nominate someone from outside their annual conference. So an annual conference can nominate two leaders. And it'd be interesting to see the nominees from outside their conference. And if several conferences recognize somebody as someone with the gifts to be a bishop, that will be very helpful to see that. They're going to vet these candidates. Right now, there's no real vetting that happens. If your annual conference recommends you, there's no background check. No, the stuff at ordination happened, but since then, there's no real theological where you at now kind of conversation, or even lifestyle or credit check or anything. So that's going to give that committee an opportunity to do whatever vetting they think is appropriate, and they're going to produce a slate that's about twice as large as what's actually needed. So there is genuine choice. They're not just saying, okay, here's your bishop's general conference, please affirm them. But it's going to be a list of vetted leaders that have distinguished themselves in that nominating process and interview process. So I think we're going to get a better class of leader, out of that kind of process than what we've had maybe in previous iterations.
Well, let me ask you about the final concern, and this is going to have to be the last bit because, of course, this is all interesting. We're already at an hour. But one of the primary concerns that I have is, John Wesley, near the end of his tenure, wrote extensively about his concerns at the role that money was playing and slowing things down and kind of compromising the integrity of the movement. It seems to me like money is already being centralized a lot at the top of the GMC, and that it's one thing to say that we don't want prestige to be associated with the office of bishop, but when we're giving them much higher compensation than the average clergy, then it seems to me that we're kind of saying one thing and doing another. Can you speak a little bit about whether or not that's a rational concern for me to have at this point in the game? And, and just so you know what undergirds this, Francis Asbury and John Wesley are my two primary models for what a bishop should look like, and neither one of them made a lot of money, wanted a lot of money, had a lifestyle that depended on money. So it seems strange to me that we have kept that part of the United Methodist Church understanding of episcopacy. There isn't anything in writing saying they're going to get rich off this role. It's said that we're going to have culturally sensitive rates determined not by the General Conference, but by the General Committee on Episcopacy. It just makes me anxious. And so I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, I have not been in a group that talks about compensation levels for, I think when we first started, going back to who's going to direct the WCA, it was basically, we keyed that maybe off of some United Methodist expectations there because we were United Methodists, What the proposal says is that the General Committee on Episcopacy, within the bounds of the budget, will recommend the salaries for bishops, and they don't all have to be the same. Really, the problem has not been there is a disparity between what a bishop makes and what a pastor makes in the United States, I suppose. Although, if you look at what large church pastors make, probably not much, not much of a disparity. In Africa, it's a huge disparity, and it's created all kinds of problems. Basically, if you're elected bishop in Africa, you are stratospherically wealthy, by African standards, and you use that money to move your family to the United States and have a residence in the United States and then fly back home, and all kinds of things that really were never unintended consequences of that. So, I think the General Committee on Episcopacy is probably the right body to do that. I think we're going to have a lean organization, so we're not going to have inflated salaries at all. But I think Billy Graham is another example of a Christian leader who didn't want to get rich, he wanted to protect his ministry from the appearance, because he could have been a very, very wealthy man with his publishing and everything. And he said, "Pay me what a large church pastor makes." And that's what he did all his life, and he gave his publishing money away. He had the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. So, I think that's probably, a pretty good rule of thumb. A bishop should make what a large church pastor makes. I'm sure there's differences in what a large church pastor. I probably don't know what a large person, what a mega church pastor makes, but in United Methodism, they did publish the salary, so you kind of know, what folks are making. It seems like what we've done is pretty much in line with that, but I think it's a worthy conversation to have.
Right on. Well, we could have a lot more worthy conversation, me and you, and maybe we will in the future. I sure appreciate you making the time for today. I'd love talking about the topic of the book you published, children's ministry. I'd love to talk about evangelism. I'd love to talk about history and polity and theology. So looks like we're both going to be a part of this GMC thing for a while longer, so We'll see what the future holds. Any closing thoughts on, we're going to plug Team Caffeine, your website and blog. We probably should urge people, if they do want to be part of the conversation around the episcopacy, figure out who their representatives are going to be to the convening conference, and just make sure they know how it is that you're seeing things. Is there any other stuff you think we should do to wrap a bow on this, or are we good?
I'm excited about the future of the Global Methodist Church. Happy to be in the same church as you, and I think we've got some big decisions before us. But I love a lot of things that I'm seeing, and I'm more optimistic than I've been in a long time. So I just say that if you're a Global Methodist and you're wondering how this is all going to shake out, the more I know, the more encouraged I get. And some of the things that seem like friction points, if you kind of understand the history of them a little bit, they make a lot more sense. Mm-hmm. Like, why are bishops holding one another accountable? Well, Methodists are supposed to hold one another accountable, but they're not the only ones holding them accountable. That kind of stuff. I think as you dig in and understand and ask questions, you will kind of understand the proposals and how we got at them, even though if they're not like what you thought we were going to do at first, I think we all had that kind of thing where they roll out some information like, well, that's not what I thought it was going to look like. But then there's usually a reason for that. So we got some really godly people that love Jesus and love the church that are working on these things. And we've entrusted a lot to them, and they've been worthy of that trust, I think, so far. So my encouragement would just be to hold on and learn more, and let's see how the Holy Spirit works here.
Amen. Well, friends, I think you, if you've tuned on till this point, you know how to pray for the denomination, pray for Chris Ritter and his ministry, pray for me that we can continue to build something that glorifies God and pleases Him together. All right, that'll close us out for today. God bless you, friends.